I feel like AI is like the new four-letter word or something. Like everybody wants to love it, either love it or hate it. There's really kind of no in between. Welcome to our Optimized podcast. And in this issue, we're going to dive into a crucial aspect of government contracting. How do we transition seamlessly from the capture to the proposal stage while still ensuring that we don't drop the baton for success in the final stretches? So we've all heard the saying that you win in capture, you lose in proposals. But how do we strike that balance between these two stages? Today, join us for a candid discussion as we unravel the challenges and triumphs that GovCon professionals face every day in this relay race to victory. So picture this. You've invested weeks, months, years, blood, sweat, tears into capturing a new opportunity, and now comes the pivotal moment, the responding to the proposal. But how do you ensure that the baton isn't dropped? This game that we play is not a game for individuals, but it's an entire team running in the same direction. So we're joined today by two wickedly smart women who have been in those trenches and are ready to kind of share their insights, Stephanie Zink and Jennifer Adeli. Their contact information is going to be provided to you so you can reach out to them directly afterwards to kind of pick their brain and to understand how it is that they're able to obtain such great success in this business. So early this year, the three of us were on a panel at Optimize 23, and we had such a great time that we thought, why not bring the team back together again and have additional discussions on a topic that apparently we live, breathe, and dream about like all the time. So Stephanie, Jennifer, why don't you say hello to our audience here and say a few words about yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Adeli. And yes, it's sad but true that having a good time for us is doing a podcast about proposals. So yes, we decided to do this again. I am the Chief Growth Officer at EdgeSource Corporation. And in that role, responsible for BD, marketing, scaling, growth, all the things that go along with that. And that includes proposals. And I came into that role after more than a decade of having my own proposal management consulting firm and doing exactly that every day with small businesses, picking up that baton from their in-house capture team, taking it over the finish line in the form of a winning proposal. So thanks for having me. Looking forward.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Zink, president and owner of Taurus Group Incorporated. I've been on my own doing kind of the proposal shop for about 10 years now, and primarily focused within the federal government contracting space, but all things proposals primarily, living in the production management and just sort of a full suite of resources for proposal production as well. Although we do dabble in capture, as I think we'll get into in this call here today, as we are required to do so necessarily because of that interrelated working with the organization. So happy to be here as well and look forward to the conversation.
So a little bit of fun, right? If I had a drink, we'd sit around and, have a bourbon and kind of chit chat for a little bit here. But I like to play a game of would you rather? And so I'm going to pose a question here. So would you rather do an oral proposal presentation to a room full of Nobel laureates or a group of toddlers?
Well, I'm going to pick the toddlers every time. I will take precocious over pretentious any day.
So I think I would also choose toddlers, but I actually would argue that it doesn't matter who the audience is because you probably need to speak at the same level anyways, right? When we're dealing with, if you're doing a proposal and it's on a complex data analytics, computer engineering proposal, the evaluators are probably not data scientists. They're probably contracting officers. And so you don't want to necessarily speak at that PhD level. You want to speak in sort of the everyday language to explain the problem and the solution. So maybe a toddler and a Nobel laureate, like you couldn't necessarily bridge the gap, but I think if you strive to, maybe that's the right place to be anyways.
I tend to agree. So like that whole KISS method, right? And the funny thing is that I always say that I'm technical enough to kind of understand what you're saying, but not enough to kind of get myself into trouble, right? So if you can explain it to me, who's not a super technical person and, like in some fields, then you've got my attention and I totally understand that. So the KISS method really is good. So I choose the toddlers any day too, because I think they're just a lot more fun. But who do I know? I don't think I've ever met a Nobel laureate. So, but seriously though. So let's just cut to the chase because we've got a lot of things we kind of want to talk about. And let's start off with the starting line, right? We're at the starting line. We're gonna kick off the capture. We've laid the groundwork that we've done during capture, and now it's time to like really kind of sprint, right? In some industries and business development and capture are kind of put together, but they really kind of need to work. And I hate to use the term seamlessly, but in sync with each other, like that whole relay race, you kind of have to continue to kind of start running next to the person that you're passing the baton to. So is there like a clear delineation between these two distinctive groups with the fact that they have two very critical roles? Sometimes they kind of get a little messy in some industries and some companies just because their size. You're just not large enough. Like not everybody can be as large as GDIT and have, one person for every capture effort and, this functional area and stuff like that. Some small businesses, you have to be the many hats kind of person. So where's that fine line that separates those two different activities? And is there really a line that we need to draw?
I'd be happy to pick that one up, and we might beat this passing the baton metaphor, but I'll pick that one up from you and run with it. So I would say there is a line, but none of the lines are solid. They're always going to be porous, or like if you look at like a gradient line, maybe versus like a thick, solid, Sharpie kind of line. So in my mind, and the way that we tackle the BD versus capture discussion is that the word business development, the word development is doing a lot of work there. You are kind of doing, in the commercial sector, you might call it demand generation. You are developing those opportunities. You're looking at pipelines. You're looking at government forecasts. For example, Department of Homeland Security posts on their acquisition forecast portal all the opportunities that are coming up. Are they recompetes? Are they small business? What's the scope? What's the time frame? You can use public resources like sam.gov. You can use all the different portals for different agencies. You can use tools like GovWin or GovTribe to look at forecasts, and then you can talk to your customers. So you're developing that. But at the time of capture, you're crossing that line again, whether it's a Sharpie type line or like a porous one. And now I think of it a little bit, I visualize capture, like you're hugging it, like capture the flag or something. And you're literally going, okay, I'm taking this opportunities that I've seen coming for a long time. It's running towards me. And now I need to grab it. Now, how do I grab it? I grab that through the right team. I grab that through the right personnel. I have the right PM that I'm going to bid on this. I capture it through the right pricing. And then at the end, I'm jumping ahead. I'm going to hand it over to the proposal. They're going to finish that capture for me, and they're going to deliver they're going to make sure that everything I've developed through the BD and capture process makes it into the finished product. But that capture for me, you can see I keep doing this hand because that's literally what I picture. I picture someone sort of like tackling and like, I got you, I won you. And that to me is the difference between BD when you're seeing it come towards you and capture, you're grabbing it.
Yeah, that's neat. I mean, I kind of like that too. When you think about the delineation, I would also concur that it is not a hard line, right? And if you want to consider it much like, I don't know, a funnel, I mean, we often look at the business development continuum overarchingly as a bit of a funnel. You can kind of think of it as an iterative process. I like to think of the kind of BD continuum almost like I would write a proposal, right? You start with your outline and then you kind of iterate to the final solution. So in the capture phase, I think where we start to kind of delineate and pass that baton to proposals is capture is focusing on the high level strategy, the solutions overview, identifying maybe some of the initial clear discriminators, any of the initial gap analysis, the initial risk assessment. And what proposals is then doing, like you said, is kind of taking it and refining it. So we are now turning those discriminators into win themes. We are pulling them into call outs. We are taking a gap analysis and we're trying to plug gaps with teammates, like you said, or pricing strategies or solutions development in tandem with subject matter experts. So to me, it's sort of an iteration towards a more refined product. And if you want to look at it as sort of a narrowing down of a funnel, I sort of think of it like that. So there's definitely a lot of overlap kind of in those lines. I know I've heard other people say, much like in the capture and proposal phase, it's often proposals needs to be involved in captures and captures need to be involved in proposals. So in the capture phase, it's sort of a big C, little p, and in proposals phase, it's a big P, little c, right? Because you need to reach back to those capture strategies.
Love this discussion because it really kind of sets up the rest of our in-depth discussion about how do we really go, like, how do we strategize this relay race? And I think what Jennifer was saying is capture really does involve several people. So in the capture phase itself, you may be running your own relay races with several different people. So, people are always kind of coming in and coming out of the race and things like that. It may be the same person, it may be a different person, it may be a different group and organization. So I think that's the really difficult thing sometimes for people to understand. And Jennifer, thank you for laying that out because you've made it like really easy to kind of digest because it is blurred a lot of the times. And it makes me kind of cringe for those of us who are kind of purist and understand what's the importance. And, my mantra is, value over importance. Everything is important, but what is the value that you're contributing to each phase? What is the value that you're bringing? What is the value of what we're doing, towards ultimately a victorious end product? So, we're passing out the baton. Batons, it gets messy, right? Things get dropped. Nothing ever goes perfectly. We understand that. So, now that we kind of set the stage and really understand the whole capture process a little bit better, now we got to hand it off to proposals, right? That's a whole different beast. Proposals operate very differently, and they do that by design. And so when you can be maybe a little fluid and maybe be a little gray about things, proposals, it's a little bit more black and white. And it takes a very different personality. It takes a different team member to be part of this team, that we move towards the proposal process. So it always goes smoothly, right? Like I kind of see sometimes passing the baton is almost kind of like throwing a grenade, like some capture managers, like, I'm going to throw this over to you. I hope you're going to catch it, but I'm going to peace out. I'm moving on. And they're on to their next squirrel that they're chasing. So, who's going to jump on this grenade first here? We've just passed the proposals and now proposals, you go do your magic.
Interesting. A grenade is often what it feels like, I think. I've also considered it a hot potato at times, right? Here's yours, back at you. And maybe the back at you thing gives us a little bit more of an understanding of this baton pass that actually does have to happen at times. For me, as you said, it doesn't always go smoothly, right? And so I've always understood and wanted and sought after good capture strategies because good capture strategies lead to good proposal strategies. What I sort of intonated at the beginning is while I focus on proposals in my organization, we do some limited capture, and we do some limited capture mostly out of necessity. When you find that the capture hasn't been developed properly, what happens is you constantly seek the answers, the information, the strategy, the solutions, the discriminators, the gaps, et cetera, that you're missing for the elements of telling the true compelling story. And so I think for me, I see things like that not necessarily always going well when you haven't developed and documented, frankly, a really well-developed capture strategy. It becomes one of those things where you then sort of have to peel back the onion from proposals and get to the core, the center of I guess, the goodness of an onion in order to get to the actual story there. So yes, we see that doesn't always happen, I think, as beautifully as we would like it to. But I definitely like to see good capture strategies documented in proposals.
Absolutely. You read my mind completely, because I was thinking about the handoff, and one of the other mantras is that we can't read minds. The proposal team cannot read minds. And so, we sometimes will see, even during like a pink team or a red team, or even further along the process, you'll see comments of like, why isn't this, in the proposal? Why aren't we talking about X? Why wasn't Y highlighted? And that's because it's living in the head of a capture team member or an executive or a PM, but it was never transitioned over, either through a solutioning session or a documentation, maybe a kickoff briefing or notes in a capture record. So I'm not a fan of busy work or, documentation for documentation's sake, like, big slide decks of like capture like 100 slides. Like, no, I'm not a fan of that. But there are key points that you need to make sure that what's in your head is making it into the person who's putting fingers to keyboard in order to write that proposal. Now, if you can data dump it yourself, participate, especially when it comes time for outlining or doing those first drafts. And if you as a capture person can even go in and like add chunks and annotated outline kind of things that need to be called out. If it's not in a capture deck, at least it's in that first raw instance of the proposal, and then it's out of your head, it's out there live. Then we have some accountability to make sure that it gets fully fleshed out.
Yeah. That's the frustrating part. And I so get frustrated. I come from a strong capture background. And so to me, capture is the center of like every universe. It can make or break, opportunities. And it frustrates me because there's some really good capture managers out there who make sure, like you said, that they communicate that we're not clairvoyant, right? But a lot of times what you hear is, oh, we'll get it in there. We got all this time. I'll get that in there. And then they get to red and we're at gold and they're like, it still doesn't, it's still not singing the themes that we want to sing. And I was like, well, you had all this time to kind of get that in there. And so, moving forward, it's been my process is to get capture engaged in the outlining a solution early, because the writers are looking for that. They need to know that. And I'm really, I've been really impressed with the sophistication of some writers recently and some technical people where they're pushing back on capture and saying, hey, I can write 1,000,000 pages, but tell me, how many pages do you need? What should I be focusing on? What are the customer hot buttons, right? Like, what are my themes? And it doesn't have to be anything sophisticated, like you said, right? Like, I don't need like 300, PowerPoint slides to explain one easy concept. But it does need to kind of be done in the initial annotated outline process because it helps everybody. And in this day and age where we're all collaborating online, we're not checking in and checking out anymore like we used to have to do. It's very easy to be transparent from the onset. So, that's a really, really great point. So, now we're okay. So we're drafting our response. We're sprinting towards the end here. All the proposal miracle workers are working on this document. And so it's funny that the writing now has been so improved. I've seen such easy ways of not only collaborating with Office 365, with other, ways to kind of collaborate online. And now we've introduced like AI. And, I feel like AI is like the new 4-letter word or something. Like everybody wants to either love it or hate it. There's really kind of no in between when you say AI or ChatGPT or other types of, software. So can't I just I can use that, right? Like I can use like AI to just write it. It's like, it's that whole phrase, can't you just is one of my most hated phrases besides, cutting edge, because like those two things,
Don't get ready on day one.
Like day one. Like, what other phrases do I hate? Like, it's like cutting edge, leading edge tech. Like, well, you can't say leading edge technology, but like we do it like better than everybody else, and there's a whole bunch of those. Like,
we could do a pod just on cliches and hyperbole.
Transition, yeah.
Seamless transition, yes.
Like, their proposal, like Team Miracle Workers, is AI the solution to like all of our writing problems?
Wow.
I love bringing up AI. Like,
yeah, I mean,
yeah. Hey, go ahead.
Grenade thrown.
Everybody wants to jump on that grenade, right?
Yeah.
So I might have a controversial take in the proposal industry, right? Because I actually think that there is a very valuable place for it. And it's that first, like, there's nothing worse than a blank piece of paper. And we tackle that with outlines and writing prompts and all of that. So ideally, you don't get a blank piece of paper. And so that could be enough to spin the flywheel and get the writers going, especially if they're technical people, they're not used to writing in proposal jargon. But I think that there are some places that you can save time and efficiency, especially in things that we might dub like boilerplate. So let's say like a recruiting plan, right? You should have a recruiting plan already developed that reflects your company's processes. But if you need to like update that, or if you need to customize it, I don't know that I would put my valuable subject matter experts' time and energy into that with the tools that we have today. I would rather take the requirements, give it to a chat GPT and say, write a recruiting plan for me that meets this process or these requirements, right? But never, ever, ever stop with what chat GPT or another AI tool did, because just like 10 years ago or yesterday, we had to take a writer and they had to do lots of iterations to get it to where it needs to be. You should never, ever stop with what ChatGPT gives you. Take it as a way to get that flywheel started so that your intellectual capital, the stuff that is your secret sauce, like you have somewhere to put it, right? So that's my controversial take. Another place that we use it actually is to help with writing like job ads and recruiting and position descriptions. So like when they say like key personnel must have this, like I pop it into ChatGPT because I don't want my recruiter spending 2 hours developing a PD. This is a little bit of a sidebar, but I don't want them spending all that time writing job descriptions when they're really formulaic, right? Like they kind of all look the same. I let a tool like ChatGPT do the stuff that can be boilerplate and have them really focus their time there. And I think you can use the same approach when it comes to proposals.
Now, Stephanie, before you jump on this grenade, or before I pass this, before we pass the baton to you on this one, I'm going to throw out another trigger word, right? Storyboarding. So I kind of equate ChatGPT a little bit to storyboarding, right? Like I feel that chat or other AI software helps you kind of better storyboard. Like, so those who were really reluctant to storyboarding they just now have automation that like automatically does it for me. So I'm the pro AI.
Interesting. My initial impression is, I mean, we've all seen the Terminator, right? Like, my brain just goes, no, Skynet. But generally, I can understand that there is a time and there is a place, right? So I would concur that in the land of, I really like the term, kind of getting the flywheel started, right? What you sometimes need is something at which to throw darts, something which to put in front of your subject matter experts to add the flavor, the secret sauce, the specialty items and things like that. I would also suggest that I think in a lot of instances where we just are seeing these ridiculously compressed timelines, it also just assists the process in getting started that much faster. Where you have the time, I would always argue that it is best to try to reintegrate things that I think a lot of folks are skipping in our proposal space, like black hats and blue teams, we sort of forget and we launch straight into pink, or we combine a pink and red because we don't have time to do a full color suite. I think a really well-run black hat, where you're using your capture management team's resources properly to identify some of those key themes, having your technical writers present to ask the questions, develop some of the content that, like you said, Ton, like you need that information to kind of pull together to build the outlines, to kind of develop the concepts. I would always lean towards, please insert the human element. Please identify, where we can show we have a unique and compelling story. I mean, even in an LPTA space. So that's sort of my, let's reintegrate the human element. But I can absolutely understand the kind of laying the platform.
So it is a fine line, right? It's a little gray right now. I think it's one of those things with new technology you're not quite sure about. Like, remember when VPC, Privia,
Right.
O365, they all came out with a new way to kind of collaborate and do color team reviews virtually. There were people who were like, no, I want you in my war room. I want to see you, touch you. I want to be able to like hit you. I want you to print. Like, I actually did one. Oh my God, it must have been, it felt like yesterday because I'm still suffering from PTSD from that one. But they were like, I want you to print out 20 copies because I'm going to like give you red pens and Post-its and flags. And that's how you're going to do the color team reviews. And I would spend hours. And I was like, oh, there's such a better way to do this. Let me introduce you to, O365 and the online collaboration, possibilities. So I think we're going through like a similar growing pain and, resettling of how is this all going to work in this whole grand scheme of, proposals. So, stay tuned for it. There's an episode on AI. I dive into that a little bit further. So the good, the bad, the ugly of it, right? So great. Let's go into a little bit more of an in-depth discussion on some of these things that we've kind of talked about. It's a great overview of like our relay race. But, being successful, it's like, I don't want to say it's like a hamster wheel, but it's kind of a perpetual 24-hour relay race. Like I'm doing this for, to cure cancer type of relay race. I'm like, I'm always going to be running this race. But the beauty of it is when the handoff goes smoothly, all of a sudden everyone's super excited. They're more confident. But there's really no shame when you drop the baton, right? Like I always tell my junior staff and people who I mentor that you can't strive to be a perfectionist or perfect in this business because you're going to crash and burn. You're going to hate yourself. You're going to blame yourself for a lot of things. And so there are a lot of things that are kind of out of your control in life and in this industry in general. And so, really learning from when things get dropped and when problems arise, I think is really critical to kind of help learn and develop and like better strategies for how to solve that. So, what are some of your like in the trenches, or you've run like 8,000 miles in this relay race that we call GovCon? What are some advice that you can kind of give our listeners on this? And, our listeners really kind of come from different walks of life. And I think it's really good not only to kind of explain to those who are new to the industry, kind of level setting that expectation that be kind to yourself and be kind to others, who are kind of coming up here. There's no formal class on this. There's training and, there's companies out there that do that. But, you can go to a million training courses, but until you get into the trenches and really kind of unpack some of these opportunities. Just last week, I experienced something that I have never seen before. And I was like, and I thought I've seen it all, like I still have that attitude, like, oh, no, this is, I've seen this before. This is how we solve that. But what are some of the things that you've kind of come across that are, that would be life-changing for some of our listeners?
I mean, we could probably ping pong this one. I mean, I listed a couple things in my notes here, so I'll grab one and then we can kind of run. But I think one thing, just to kind of take the kind of lessons learned approach here, right? Is really take an opportunity to kind of catalog, perhaps those missteps, the baton drops and things like that as well as a learning opportunity. Like you said, Ton, it's not necessarily anything that you can control as these things happen. So identify, what went wrong there. I think one of those things that often goes wrong is just like a resourcing discussion and having a conversation upfront, pre-RFP, really working through an overarching kind of capture management strategy of a legitimate identification of the resourcing needs, internal and external, that you need to support a particular bid will save so much time, energy, effort, tears, as you're kind of working through these baton passes. Employee consultant burnout is a very, very real thing, especially in our environment. And recognizing that upfront, identifying people by name, ensuring everybody's got a backup or that somebody's being communicated with about what is happening within this resourcing discussion, I think will keep the conversation flowing. I think it will reduce baton drops because somebody is always there to kind of pick it up and run, even if we've lost time, even if we have to restart something. I think some of that resourcing discussion is something that is a really key takeaway from this as soon and as early as you can identify that so that you kind of reduce the problems that you would necessarily have with some of those burnout issues.
Excellent. And thinking about resourcing, one of the ways that we have tried to make that baton pass work, especially when you're working with an external resource, you're working with a proposal management firm or independent outside consultant. Exactly. We're like yourselves or like the company that I used to have, and we still use external resources ourselves, is trying to standardize as many of those handoff points as possible. And I'm cautious about using the word standardize because that sounds like really big and heavy and onerous. And I really try to stay away from that. When by standardize, I mean, just like do the same thing, reduce your decision fatigue, right? So for example, these sound so easy, right? And I'm a big fan. I have it over here on my desk. I should grab it. But Checklist Manifesto is a great book. It's very small. It's essentially the methodology that pilots use, which is called the Checklist Manifesto, the book. And it's written by a pilot. It's probably 20 plus years old. And it talks about using checklists. Now, you don't have to have, again, formal checklists, but I'm talking about mental checklists. So for example, if you know that every time you make a bid decision, what are the next things that happen? We turn on this, we stand up the SharePoint portal. We have make the folders the exact same every time. We have a folder that says copy me, a library that says copy me. And all the subfolders are exactly the same.
Yeah.
And there's links to our master proposal template in there so that if we change the master, you always are grabbing the latest. So you don't have any decision fatigue. And all you need is one person to know that when a bid decision is made, they turn on that SharePoint library, and that SharePoint library copies the other one. So it's like a 2-click thing. Nobody has to ask who's assigned. Nobody has to ask, how should I organize it? It's always organized the same way. So it helps with that decision fatigue up front and passing the baton. But it also helps that when you're doing the proposal, everybody who's coming in recognizes that folder library hierarchy. They know exactly where to go to find the certain type of documents or instructions, and they don't have decision fatigue either. They're not having to text you saying, where can I find the RFP? Where can I find the pink team draft? It's always in the same place on every proposal. And it sounds so obvious, but those little things will, again, clear your brain, clear your baton passes, and just that way your brain can focus on the stuff that is added value, intellectual capital, secret sauce, and so on.
Yeah, can I grab that thread a little bit? The beauty of doing things like that for yourself is that you create a kind of a culture where everybody accepts that that is what they do. Everybody accesses and utilizes the system, the collaboration platform. Those folders get populated and they are there for posterity's sake, which is great. What I think we often find is we just don't have the files. We don't know where to find things. They're lodged in somebody's head. Why are we doing this again? I think I've written this past performance response. Where is that? So if you can get into a habit of, whether you want to call it standardized or whatever you want to call it, people start using the process, people start respecting the process, and then you start having all of those artifacts available in order to expedite and create efficiencies in the future.
Yeah. I'll give you a perfect demo. We're going to ping pong a little bit here, if you don't mind, Tian. So thinking about stuff being in people's heads. When I came on board at my, at EdSource, they had all their they had all their prior proposals organized by year. So instead of because it was in their head, because they knew inherently, oh, yeah, we bid on that. It was 2019. It was 2021. They knew to go to that folder. So seems again self-evident, but one of the first things we did was like, no, this needs to be organized by agency, because then I don't have to ask someone, where would I find that last State Department proposal, or where would I find that? So little things like that, even how you label it, think about, can somebody find it without asking me? I'm a huge fan of self-service. Huge.
Yep.
If you have a self-service mantra, then that will go a long way with the baton passing and the efficiency and so on.
I have not heard that whole self-service. That's a really great phrase.
Hey, look, it applies to, I use it for raising my children. The self-service, like that's self-service.
Yes. And so, and I think that really suits the up and coming generation of professionals, right? I'm a Gen Xer, right? And so we operate very differently than the millennials, than the up and coming professionals. And so we have to understand and really be sensitive to the organization. And so we're really process focused. So a lot of, what you're saying, Jennifer, we operate in. And that's the reason why a lot of people like working with us, is that you're always going to know what to expect. And I'm always amazed when I go back to a customer that I haven't worked with in a while, and I'm like, hey, that's my artifact. I'm like, wait a second, those are my folders. I have like Copy Me. It's like a standard folder file. It's like that just gets copied over regardless. And it's got artifacts in there, and everything like that. But it's those little things that are a time suck that people, don't realize that you could really benefit from. But with that too, though, is I run into some people who are really inflexible about process. And so they'll do that despite, really not being able to kind of pivot and not being able to really kind of assess the situation. And I think that's where you've encountered people who are more experienced. Those of us who have been in the trenches for a while will kind of know, I'm going to skip this color team review, despite, the fact that, yes, our process says this and we should be doing this, but it doesn't beg for it, right? So task order proposals, different than scorecard proposals, different than longer, bigger, type of multi-year, teaming partner type of tough efforts. And so you really do kind of need to learn how to tailor those, those processes for the right situation. And I think the other thing too is there's a time and a place to kind of bring in outside resources. Sometimes you are drinking your own Kool-Aid. To you, it makes sense. And so I'm always coming into a situation where I have no idea how and where you store things, but I'm going to ask those indelicate questions sometimes, or the questions that make me sound a little stupid, like, how do we do this? Why are we doing it this way? Or where can I find this? And so if it's obvious to me, then it should be obvious to anyone. And so, I always kind of say that the process and the work should continue regardless of who's there. So if you have that one person who's like the linchpin to everything, the control, we all know these people, right? They're like the gatekeepers of everything, and no one knows what magically happens between, like behind that door. Like, this is not the Wizard of Oz. This is, like, you are a corporation. You need to be like everybody is dispensable, right? We are not indispensable, and we shouldn't act like or treat the content and the data in that manner. So I'm with you on that one. So what other what other takeaways or in the trenches items should we kind of talk about here?
I mean, I can think too. I mean, Actual AARs, lessons learned, are few and far between. And some of that is based on me just living in sort of an external consultancy world, and I'm not necessarily always pulled into those. I love when I am. It is about learning. It is about providing feedback. It is about documenting it, much like a corrective action plan might be. If you've identified that you had a resourcing issue, is it that you need to identify, a better schedule, better introduction of internal resources? Do you need some external resources? Do you need some training for your internal team? Can you identify what those things are? Identify a specific person to own that as an actual corrective action, and then develop and respond to that so that you can feed the proposal process. I think a lot of folks see proposals as the end of the line. And for me, it is still a loop back system. So take the information that you've learned from the actual proposal process itself, a win or a loss, and feed that back to even your marketing team. Are we identifying the right agencies? Are we marketing to the right folks? Do we actually have a true mission understanding? I mean, are we losing the same types of bids for the same types of reasons, right? So to me, it's not stopping at the very end of that proposal process. I know it's very easy. I want to do it too. I want to put it in, I think you said, Tom, the mental shred bin and go to sleep for 8 hours. But it doesn't always work that way. I mean, I think pausing and doing a real AAR is very valuable.
It is very valuable. One of the things that we strive to do, and we don't always do it well or consistently, but one of the things that I'm a big fan of is when we call it an AAR, after action review or lessons learned, it feels that has a connotation, right? The people, it's like they got in trouble. They're at the principal's office
because they're like, "Ooh, I'm gonna get in trouble for something," or "I'm gonna I don't want to narc on someone," and that's kind of like the attitude that people take. And I get that. And sometimes, when things go wrong, I think a lot of times it comes from the top down. Like, oh, I need an after action on why did it go wrong? But at the same time, just like how, just with proposal debriefs, for example, right? Everybody wants a proposal debrief when you lose. And no one ever wants to ask when you win. And it's like, you really, that's very critical, is to understand, yes, you won, but why did you win? What did you win on? Because that helps then for you in the next relay race that you're going to go. I want to do more of that. I need to bring that team member back on, or I need to do less of this and push more of this. And so being able to really kind of get into the mindset of the customer as to why you win, sometimes it's just not always obvious. And so again, customers, they're not clairvoyant. And so you shouldn't always assume, that the reason why you won is because of this. You may have won because they liked something else. It wasn't because you had a wonderful management plan or the staffing approach was.
You were just the cheapest. Let's be honest. They're like, take it or leave it now. But picking up on that after action, I'm a big fan of a proposal closeout. So we do kickoffs. We are all very familiar with kickoffs, but and if we want to look back on the day, if you were to look at a Shipley process, right, which nobody really uses the big Shipley process anymore, but there was never really a closeout. There was lessons learned and stuff like that. But I love a closeout. And here's what we do. If it's done by the book, is you built everything up and then you deconstruct it. So you say, oh, that the updated org charts, take all of those, get them in the graphics library, make sure that they're logged. The new version of the recruiting plan that we did dust off and revise because we have a new tool now, put that in our boilerplate library. Make sure that it is appropriately stamped as this is the 2023 version or whatever, right? So build it up and deconstruct it. And in my experience, one of the best ways, the best person to have, if you have that resource, for me was always the writer. Because the writer or the editor was sort of that person who really knew the content. So they would know what was different about this management plan versus that one. Sure. And they would know that it was, the first paragraph is exactly the same. The last paragraph was exactly the same. But in the middle, we tweaked this process. It's no longer 5 steps. Now it's 3 steps. And it's no longer circular. It's linear. And so they would be able to kind of call attention and keep that content library up to date and keep those versions up to date. So if you have the ability, and it's quick, actually, if you do it right, it can just be the next day, submit, celebrate. Next morning, okay, what do I need to do to close it out? Change the status in GovWin or in my, tool for tracking my opportunities, close out the proposal library, deconstruct it, and then gather lessons learned as well. And if you combine it with closeout, it doesn't feel like it's only being done when you're in trouble. It's just part of the normal process.
I think it's wonderful. And it also kind of speaks to your kind of overarching ease of checklist process. It's a very easy thing to checklist. Someone just needs to do these 27 things. And it might actually be 27 things, but they're all really easy, like you said. I mean, it might be collecting artifacts from external resources and making sure that you've got everything that's been actually provided, that you reorganize a folder that somebody might have, I don't know, misallocated information. Yeah. It's making sure that everything's prepared for the next bid.
How many times have we said, where is the source graphic for that process flow that we drew in 2021? And Sarah's got it, but she doesn't work for us anymore. Or an outside consultant drew it for us and we never asked for the source file. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, I kind of call it like my housekeeping list.
Yep.
Right. And it's good. And I would even take that a step further. I think everyone's IT would probably appreciate this too, right? Cleaning out like old versions of things. There's no reasons to keep a lot of different things. And so having someone be the gatekeeper of, yes, let's get this like 50 million meg file off of, our server, or like, let's make sure that we don't accidentally grab this graphic and different things like that. So
that is now like outdated. And we don't want to perpetuate that. Yeah,
exactly. Right. So let's clean house. And I think it's kind of, for me, it's kind of therapeutic, really. And the biggest thing too, is I notice this sometimes because I get invited to a million different workspaces, is that no one kills my access. And so that's the worst is data security and the security of everyone, right? It's kick everyone off the team site or out of SharePoint that should no longer be there. If you've got subs, there's no need for them to be in there anymore, right? That's where a lot of data gets lost. And so I'm always very hypersensitive about the right people having access to the right content. Like, I'm all for collaborating. I'm huge on transparency, but like when it's over, I'm locking that puppy down. Like, I don't want anybody else to, mess with it or get lost or save it and walk off to, their next employer with, my material. So, no, this has all been great. So, I think there's so many key takeaways here, but I think, like win, lose or draw though, like this whole government contracting, success relay race, is just, we need to practice, we need to fall in order to kind of do better and to be better and to be successful. So, but at the end of the day, though, win, lose, or draw, we win and lose, like as a team. So I think that's something that I think we all kind of need to kind of remember as we are moving along here in really busy times, is just to kind of, be good to each other, be kind, and be understanding that, we're all in it together here. We all want the same result. So rapid quick fire here, right? Like let's close it out with some fun questions. So if you had a superpower for winning contracts, what would it be?
A little bit of time travel to the evaluation board would help.
So you want to be Flash. Like I'm a big superhero fan. I've got a son, so I know all my DC Marvel characters. So you would be Flash. Yeah. You would want to be able to like time travel.
Yeah, maybe it would be a little more about the clairvoyance, element of what are we really, really after here on the evaluation committee board, or, those folks really doing that source selection. But yeah.
Jen?
If I had a superpower, it would be to convince all the contracting authorities across the whole federal government to use a standard format and maybe just make it like a checklist or something. I don't know, maybe a checklist again. But, how many times have we seen like the same errors, in the same RP? Like, come on, like
same agency. It's like,
maybe I changed my mind. If we all have the same superpower, can we superpower it?
Like mega evolve, like that's very Pokemon now. We all want to mega evolve, right?
Yes.
Or like the transfer where like we each.
Yes. Hold on. Yeah.
Yeah. I will say that the fact that, controversial take as well, I think the fact that companies that are outside proposal consultants and that whole thing exists is just a sign that it's very inefficient. Like, yes, we need competition. Yes, we need transparency, but the hours and days and lifetimes spent cannot be healthy for the federal government in general, right? So my superpower would be, I don't know, somehow to slash that in like half or something. I don't know.
Love it.
I have so many different superheroes that it's kind of hard for me to pick, because what you're saying, Jennifer, I would love to have, and this is why I like to participate in the reverse industry days that federal agencies have, because those are really great opportunities for agencies to understand from the industry side how we interpret things, how we're receiving or perceiving things. And so I almost want to be the character from Guardians of the Galaxy. I forget what her name is, but she's the one who's she's an empath.
Mantis.
Mantis. Yes, I kind of want to be like Mantis, right? Like, oh, you're feeling, and be able to kind of communicate and convey that, because I think at the end of the day, if we all kind of understood or like put ourselves in the other person's shoes, I think it would be huge for everybody to understand where they're coming from, why we say what we do, why we do what we do. And it would avoid a lot of this misunderstanding and, controversy and stuff like that. So, all right. And then the last one here is describe proposals in one word.
God, I have so many words.
One word, not a phrase.
Persuasion?
Okay. Positive. If I hyphenate necessary evil, is that this word?
Sure.
I think you were reading my mind, because I was actually going to go for a hyphenated word too. Like, it is kind of a necessary evil. I was just going to go with evil in general. Kind of summarizes it, right? We need proposals in order to win contracts. We need contracts to keep it's a never.
Like, we do need them, right? Back to the topic of like, we do want competition.
Sure.
We do want companies to have an opportunity to get in front of the customer, to introduce their solutions, may the best team win, all that. So they are a necessary evil. I think we can it's gotten so much better, let's be honest. And the government has gotten much better on their side too, in a lot of ways. In some ways, it's still kind of stuck in the dark, but there are a lot of efficiencies, coming through. So I think we're on the right trajectory. It's only taken, I don't know, my whole career to make it happen. But
sure.
Yeah, I know, but they could do one more thing for me, and then I'm just going to call it a day and be like, yeah, I'm not going to be able to influence them to do anything different. But can we stop with the Friday proposal submissions?
Fridays are my Mondays.
What are they going to do? Are you going to review my proposal after 5 p.m. on a Friday? Then just give me the weekend and make it due first thing Monday morning.
Right. Or stop releasing all of the madness on Friday.
Yeah, with like a 2-week turn, knowing that those first 2 days out of the 2 weeks is automatically like, drop it on Monday. So it's like Monday to Monday.
Yeah, I don't really care where they drop it anymore, because I actually don't mind a Friday, because then I have all weekend to kind of prepare. Yeah. But then I'm a sadist when it comes to.
What if they all dropped on the same day? Like, what if it was like on the 1st of every month, and then like everything was just chaos.
How about the 1st and the 15th of each month? Those are the only 2 days that you can drop a proposal, and then you can still do the 2-week turnaround time.
Well, to be honest, you can completely resource then, because you would absolutely be prepared and understand what is happening.
The industry could totally plan around that.
Instead of us like refreshing like SAM.gov every 10 minutes waiting for something to come out.
Government industry members who are listening to this podcast,
we solved
help us to help you.
The 1st and the 15th.
until all proposal professionals have heart attacks on the 1st and the 15th in the future. Yeah.
No one can have a vacation day on the 1st and the 15th of every month.
Yeah, we can work around this.
You could just skew it up to post at that time.
Exactly. Delayed submission to the 1st and the 15th. And no more Friday proposal submissions. I have declared it a holiday.
All right, we solved it.
There you go.
Well done, ladies.
Oh my gosh, this has been like way too much fun. Thank you so much, Stephanie and Jennifer, for your time today. I've really we have enjoyed preparing for this topic so much. And I know we could literally do this for the rest of the day, but unfortunately, we all have client demands and proposals that we must go and address. So I want to thank the listeners for joining us today. I hope that you have found it not only entertaining, but informative. And so stay tuned for our next podcast. We have several in this series here where I will be talking to both industry and government guests. So that's a wrap, folks. Keep sharing, sipping, and strategizing. And remember, the secret ingredient is genuine connections and a glass of bourbon infused with wit.
Bye.
Thanks.